In her book, Daring Greatly, Brené Brown writes about the powerful act of showing vulnerability. Expressing our truth aloud and showing our true selves is not easy. It involves taking a risk, but it's necessary for building relationships. And it's a deeply spiritual act. She writes, admitting our vulnerability, learning to live with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure is letting God in. It is also key to a meaningful life. Why? Because that's how we connect to others, and connecting to others is what makes life worth living. As part of her research on vulnerability, Dr. Brown asked her subjects to complete the sentence, vulnerability is. Think for a moment, what would you have said? Listen to the responses she received. Vulnerability is sharing an unpopular opinion. Vulnerability is standing up for myself. Vulnerability is asking for help. Vulnerability is starting my own business. Vulnerability is calling a friend whose child died. Vulnerability is falling in love. Brown's research centers on this counterintuitive, even paradoxical idea. We show our strength not by making our heart an impregnable fortress, but by opening ourselves emotionally. Only by taking the risk of being hurt do we create the conditions for friendship and love, hope, and healing. This dynamic comes powerfully to life in Parashat Viyagash. Our Parsha opens with an impassioned speech by Judah as he stands before an all-powerful Egyptian official who holds the lives of the Israelite brothers in his hands. This official, Pharaoh's number 2, has just declared that he will enslave Benjamin, the youngest of the brothers, for allegedly stealing from him. You'll recall that long ago, Judah was the brother responsible for selling Joseph into Egyptian slavery. Judah now freely offers himself as a slave to this Egyptian in place of Benjamin, arguing that losing his precious young son would kill their elderly father. Things have come full circle, and the long-standing, nearly fatal rift in the family is about to be healed. Judah, who once treated young Joseph so callously, now comes forward courageously to protect Benjamin. Judah, who once resented Jacob's special love for Joseph, now compassionately accepts his father's special love for Benjamin and acts to save the lives of both father and son. The narrator begins the episode as follows. Vayigash elav Yehudah. Judah approached and said, please, my lord, let your servant appeal to my lord, and do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh. It's the opening word that introduces Judah's speech, Vayigash, he approached, that I want to focus on. The verb literally means to come close. Judah believes that he is standing before a stranger, but the narrator knows better and chooses this word with great care. At this moment, Judah is actually standing before his brother Joseph. Through his words, Judah tries to get closer to his brother, not only physically, but emotionally. The brother he once kept at a distance and tried to remove from the family, he now approaches. And Joseph, who has lived far away from his family for all these years and has long been emotionally estranged, now begins to feel a new sense of closeness and connection. He responds to Judah's stance of vulnerability with his own call to his brothers, asking that they come closer to him. The Torah repeats the verb twice to emphasize the brothers finally coming closer, diminishing the distance between them. Following Judah's speech, Joseph says, Gishu na Eli, vayigshu, come forward to me, and they came forward. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt. Ultimately, it is Judah's stepping forward, his willingness to be vulnerable, his risking his own life for the sake of Benjamin, that stirs Joseph and causes him to reveal his identity and reconcile with his brothers. Each side steps forward, taking a risk, and it results in their shared emotional vulnerability as they come together, cry together, and embrace. In the end, Joseph tells his brothers to bring their father Jacob and the whole family to Egypt, where he can provide for all of them. He has them live in a region called Goshen, a name reminiscent of Vayigash, cementing their closeness. How do we know that each side's approaching one another has worked and their forgiveness is genuine? Our sages see a clue in Joseph's words as he finally reveals the truth to his astonished brothers. He says, "V'hinei einechem ra'ot ve'einei achi Binyamin." You can see for yourselves, and my brother Benjamin for himself, that it is I indeed who am speaking to you. Rabbi Elazar teaches that by separating Benjamin's eyes in the verse, Einei achi Binyamin, from the brother's eyes, Einechem, Joseph is saying, just as I harbor no resentment in my heart toward my brother Benjamin, so too I harbor no resentment toward you, my brothers. Perhaps it also shows that Joseph finally can see what happened to him from a different perspective. Perhaps he can now see the situation through his brother's eyes and understand how his youthful arrogance added to their pain. The once insensitive teenager has learned empathy. The verse continues, Kifi hamidaber aleichem. It is indeed I who am speaking to you. Rabbi Elazar offers a wordplay on kifi. Rather than meaning indeed, he offers that fi also means mouth. As my mouth, kifi, so is my heart. Joseph is no longer playing a role by hiding his identity from his brothers. He speaks authentically, from the heart, and means what he says. In this dramatic scene, Judah is calling on the Egyptian ruler to let his brother go. This act foreshadows what is coming up in the book of Exodus, when Moses will make a similar demand of Pharaoh, let my people go. Our people's history has been shaped by these courageous acts of stepping forward on behalf of those who are suffering. For as Judah says in his speech, Nafsho kishura b'nafsho, his father's life is bound up with the life of Benjamin. Kshura literally means tied together. The Torah is telling all of us that our lives are kshurim, bound together. We are dependent on one another for physical and emotional survival. The violent cycle in Genesis of brothers turning against one another will finally come to an end with Joseph and his brothers. They break the pattern by daring to do things differently, changing long-held habits. They end their long years of estrangement by standing in physical and emotional closeness to one another and seeing each other as brothers, kinfolk obligated to care for and love one another. The Parsha ends with Joseph using his power in Egypt to provide for his family for the rest of his days. One courageous act of vulnerability by Judah is answered by Joseph's courageous act of vulnerability, his surprising admission of his true identity, and his inviting his family into his life. Barriers come down, emotional fortresses are dismantled, hearts come together at last in forgiveness and love. As we stand on the threshold of a new year, may we also remember that it's never too late to reconcile with those whom we loved but now feel estranged from. Recognizing our shared humanity and showing empathy for one another is always possible. May we step into this new year by stepping closer to one another. Shabbat Shalom.